Hey everybody, welcome back. Pro Carry Trucker. And we are going to knock out another history video. If y'all can see, I got my safety glasses on. But the thing about these safety glasses, I don't know if it'll show on here or not. Down on the bottom here, yeah, this way, right in here. These safety glasses have readers in them. I got my contacts in and it makes it hard to read. Contacts, I got the contacts in, they correct my far vision, but I actually got a strong enough subscription now that it kind of messes up my near vision, kind of makes it hard reading. So if I want to read something, I generally either have to have a reading glasses or take my contacts out. Contacts out, I can see just fine up close. But we're going to knock out a history video. If I can get situated here and get at least somewhat comfortable. We're on the Quartering Act of 1774. Let's not confuse this with the Quartering Act of 1765. So there's a Quartering Act in 1765, and now we got another Quartering Act in 1774 that has a little bit different can't even, my mind just went blank. A little bit different specifications, I guess, for the Quartering Act. I think I'm going to shut this TV off. Maybe we won't get that different color flashing on the camera there. But this is the last of the Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts. We're basically igniting the powder keg of war. Which, if we look at what's going on today, lining up the powder kegs, and I think the torch is there ready to drop on the powder dripping out of the kegs right now. But I'm in the motel room. I got my printouts. I did bring my entire printouts. This is one printout, 4 pages, and then I got another printout. It's 2 pages here. I usually like this one, but this was from, I think, ushistory.org. Yeah. This printout is from ushistory.org. I use quite a bit of those. And this printout here is from www.battlefields.org. The ushistory.org seems to be pretty good. I use it quite a bit. I think this one's 4 pages because if you'll notice the difference in the printing, that compared to this. But I have started copying some down in my notebook. Oh, that's the Massachusetts Government Act. Oh, I guess I haven't started transferring down for the Quartering Act, so I'm going to have to do that. I've got Sunday off, so maybe I can get transferred into my notebook too. But the Quartering Act 1774 was established June 2nd, 1774. Similar in substance to the Quartering Act of 1765. June 2nd, 1774. Whereas doubts have been entertained whether troops can be quartered otherwise than in barracks, in case barracks have been provided sufficient for quartering of all the officers and soldiers within any town, township, city, district, or place within His Majesty's domains in North America, and whereas it may frequently happen from the situation of such barracks that if troops should be quartered therein, they should not be stationed where their presence may be necessary and required. Be it therefore enacted by the King's most excellent Majesty, by and with the advised the consent of the Lords and Commons in this present Parliament assembled, that in such cases it shall and may be lawful for the persons who now are or may be hereafter authorized by law in any of the provinces within His Majesty's domain in North America, and they are hereby respectively authorized, empowered, and directed in the requisition of the officer who, for the time being, has the command of His Majesty's forces in North America, to cause any officer or soldier in His Majesty's service to be quartered and billeted in such a manner as now directed by law, where no barracks are provided by the colonies. 2. And it be further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that if it shall happen at any time that any officer or soldier in H is, well, I'm sure that's his, soldiers in His Majesty's service shall remain within any of the said colonies without quarters for the space of 24 hours, after such quarters shall have been demanded, it shall and may be lawful for the governor of the province to order and direct such and so many uninhabited houses, outhouses, barns, or other buildings as he shall think necessary to be taken, making a reasonable allowance for the same, and make fit for the reception of such officers and soldiers, and to put and quarter such officers and soldiers therein for such time as he shall think proper. And it be further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that his act and everything herein contained shall continue to be in force in all His Majesty's domains in North America until March 24th, 1776. Go back here, and it specifically says on here, uninhabited houses, outhouses, which anybody old enough to know what an outhouse is, I'm sure they're not talking about the one that you go number one or number two in. By outhouses, I'm sure they mean by what we would consider outbuildings, garages, sheds, stuff like that. I don't know any soldier that would be willing to be put up and have to sleep in a outhouse, but I'm sure they're talking about outbuildings. And it's going to remain in effect March 24th, 1776. We have a similar saying in our Constitution. Ours basically says that soldiers cannot be forced to, citizens cannot be forced to allow soldiers to stay in their house when there's not a time of war. I would have to read into it a little bit to see the particulars on it, but we've got a similar saying in our Constitution. We'll go over here to the battlefields.org and go read it real quick. Perhaps none of the punitive acts passed by the British Parliament to quell the rebellious activities occurring in the colonies during the build-up of the Revolutionary War were quite as personal as the Quartering Act of 1774. By punitive acts, they mean the coercive or the Intolerable Acts. While other acts dealt with taxation, regulation, trade, and administration of justice, the Quartering Act actually dealt with the disposition of armed British soldiers in the colonies. The Quartering Act specified the condition of the lodging of British troops in all of colonial North America. However, there are many misconceptions about the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act of 1774 was not the first British Quartering Act which covered it. There was one in 1765, and there was actually a partial one before that. I will put a link to the video for the Quartering Act of 1765 down in the description. You can check it out. With an empire that stretched across the world, the British needed to quarter troops in countries all around the globe. Though many British soldiers had stayed in the American colonies during the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, also known as the 7 Years' War, 54, 55, they call it the 7 Years' War, but 1754 to 1760, that's 6 years. Another 3, that's 9. I didn't catch that the first time. Some continued to stay in the colonies following the conflict. Having a standing regular army in colonial cities during peacetime began to lead to resentment and anger among the colonial leaders. While in London, this force was viewed as a necessary evil to help secure the borders of the British North American Empire. And going back to the Boston Tea Party, a little insert they put in here. I'm sure that's just a painting. I'm sure that's not actually what it looked like at the time, but in 1765, Parliament passed the amendment to the Mutiny Act, which became known as the Quartering Act of 1765. Contrary to popular belief, this Quartering Act did not direct British soldiers to be billeted in the private homes of the colonists. The 1765 Act actually prohibited British soldiers from being quartered in private homes, but it did make the colonial legislators responsible for paying for and providing for barracks or other accommodations to house British regulars. Other accommodations the colonists could bill British troops in included inns, livery stables, alehouses, and other public houses. Keyword, other public houses. British soldiers had been housed in New York and other American cities, but were generally forced to stay in military barracks. In the city of Boston, the placement of British troops constantly was an issue, as the city tried to keep them further from the center of the city, while the British forces pushed to have them closer among the townsfolk. Relationships between British soldiers and colonial civilians were often tense, and occasionally, which this printout kind of messed up, kind of double printed. Were often tense and occasionally boiled over into violence, especially in Boston. If you remember back, what video was it? There was actually a conflict where some colonists got killed. They cornered British soldiers. The British soldiers responded. They ended up firing into the crowd. That was a big mess. As tensions continued to grow between the soldiers and civilians, the people of Boston continued to fight back against the British attempts to tax and control them. This culminated on December of 1773 when numerous Bostonians, in an act of defiance, dumped thousands of pounds of British tea into Boston Harbor, the Boston Tea Party, which led up to the Coercive Acts or the Intolerable Acts. 1774, following the infamous Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament passed 4 acts known as the Coercive Acts, Intolerable Acts, which the Intolerable Act, the British called them the Coercive Acts, the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. The first 3 acts closed the port of Boston, which we covered those in the last 3 videos, took away Massachusetts' ability to self-govern, and removed their ability to administer justice to British soldiers in the colony. The last act was the Quartering Act of 1774, which applied not just to Massachusetts, but to all American colonies, and was only slightly different than the 1765 Act. This new act allowed royal governors rather than colonial legislatures to find homes and buildings to quarter and house British soldiers. So before it was just basically the colonial leaders, the colonial legislatures, but now it's the royal governors that are deciding where the soldiers will stay. This only further enraged the colonists by having what appeared to be foreign soldiers boarded in American cities and taking away their authority to keep the soldiers distant. Kind of like what I'm seeing going on today. The government is getting authority figures trying to bunch us up and control us, and we don't want that. We want to push them out. Going on big time right now. As it had been ongoing debate in colonial British America, the 1774 Act sought to clarify and expand the British ability to quarter troops in American cities. It stated up front that doubts have been entered whether troops can be quartered otherwise than in barracks, which we covered that up here. The first part of it, whereas doubts have been entertained. The royal governor had the rights to use uninhabited houses, outhouses, barns, or other buildings, quarter soldiers, while other buildings could be open to broad interpretation. Contrary to popular belief, the 1774 Act, like the 1765 one, did not mandate that British soldiers stay in occupied private homes or of American colonists. In fact, it specifically prohibited it. I'm not seeing where it specifically prohibited it. It just said, it said uninhabited. Regardless, the American colonists were enraged by the Quartering Act with the other coercive acts and were quickly rebranded the Intolerable Acts. Like I said, British called them the coercive acts. The colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. The Quartering Act was also especially like I said, my printer for some reason is missing sections. I can catch most of it there. The British troops continued to be quartered in Boston, and on April 19th, 1775, large-scale bloodshed between British regular soldiers and Massachusetts militiamen broke out at the Battle of Lexington and Concord that began the American War for Independence. A year later, in January 1776, Thomas Jefferson included the Quartering Act in the Declaration of Independence in a list of repeated injuries and usurpations. Among the grievances against King George III was that he kept among us looks like in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislature. Oh wow, this one's real bad. I'm going to have to skip this because it's pretty well printed. Printed one line and half of another. Printed the next line, half of another. Printed the next line, half of the other. So I am going to skip that part. I'm sure that's part of that has to do with the way they don't want us learning history. They take stuff out of public schools. A lot of stuff ain't being taught in public schools. And like, see, I could be wrong, but I think this is a way of us not even being able to because it's awful funny that it would print that page like that where most of the time it'll print just fine. It printed this just fine. It did overlay on the second page, which I think that had to do with the website. Where did I see that at? Where did I see that? Okay, it was on this one. I think that had to do with the website down there. But the double print, the print over. Yeah. You get the gist of the Quartering Act 1765. I will put a link to the Quartering Act of... Okay, the Quartering Act 1774 is what we just covered. I will put a link to the Quartering Act of 1765 in the description below. You can check it out. And we appreciate you watching, and we will catch you on the next video.